Hello, my name is Clare Chu, and today my lecture is entitled A Courtly Gathering of Qing Treasures, Chinese Snuff Bottles from Taiwanese Collections. This lecture accompanies the exhibition I have curated of over 700 Chinese snuff bottles to be held at the end of this month at the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall in Taipei. I am only able to show you a small portion of the bottles on display during this lecture, and have selected with care to show the wide variety of bottles in local collections there. I am extremely honored to be the curator of this exhibition, and I am immensely grateful that the Chinese Culture and Fine Arts Association, together with the International Chinese Snuff Bottle Society, have been able to collaborate to allow this to happen. I am deeply grateful to Mike Ma, the Taipei Convention Organization Committee Chair. He spent many hours liaising with committees, organizing, and also accompanying me on visits to see the superb collections of snuff bottles that were often part of larger prestigious collections of paintings and works of art. It was a privilege to meet and work with the president of the Chinese Culture and Fine Arts Association, Chen Xiaochun, who was a most gracious host, along with her board and executive assistant. I would like to express my sincere appreciation and heartfelt thanks to both President Chen and to the Chinese Culture and Fine Arts Association for their generosity and dedication. I am immensely grateful to our president, Bert Ford, whom I've known for almost 40 years. I very much admire her steadfast belief in and determination for this virtual convention, of which this lecture is just one element. I would also like to acknowledge the generosity of the Taipei collectors who welcomed me into their homes and made their bottles available for others to enjoy. Along with the local collectors exhibition, the National Palace Museum generously extended its show to be enjoyed with its rich heritage of bottles that belong to emperors, princes, and palace officials. From the very beginning, snuff bottles have been collected by a varied demographic: men and women, emperors and courtiers, scholars, merchants, entrepreneurs, doctors, professors, and retirees. Throughout the Qing dynasty, the cultural elite were determined to exhibit their wealth, knowledge, and elevated status through extravagant gestures, such as collecting art and enjoying literati gatherings in their private gardens. In 1684, when the Kangxi Emperor was 30 years old, and on his southern tour to Nanjing, two Italian Jesuit fathers, Ballat and Gabbiani, presented him with several gifts from the Vatican, including imported European snuff, black linen cloth, and silver items. The emperor returned all of the gifts except for the snuff. The Vatican made further presentations through the missionaries to Kangxi in 1705, and again in 1720. The emperor returned the favor in 1706, when he presented an enameled glass snuff bottle made in the palace workshops to the papal legate, Maillard de Tournon. That bottle is now housed in the Vatican Museum in Rome, Italy. Records show that Yongcheng, who reigned from 1723 to 1735, and Qianlong, who reigned from 1736 to 1795, were snuff takers, and almost certainly collectors of snuff bottles. The archives of the Imperial Household Department for the Yongcheng period show that over 3,000 bottles were made in the palace workshops during that reign, some for bestowal to palace officials. This continued as an imperial habit into the 19th century. The Daguan Emperor, who reigned from 1821 to 1850, is shown in one painting in the imperial collection at leisure in a pavilion with a snuff bottle on the table beside him. This is an extremely rare early 18th century imperial porcelain bottle, superbly decorated with iron red formalized scrolling borders, with on one side a design of blossoming peonies and a butterfly, the reverse with lilies, painted in family rose enamels, surrounded by gilt floral scrolls over a dark blue ground, and the base has a Qianlong Nyanja mark in seal script, and it is of the period. This bottle is illustrative of the type of porcelain bottles that can be seen today in the imperial collections, and which may have been intended for bestowal by the emperor to both courtiers and foreign envoys. This example can be attributed to the period of Tang Ying at the imperial kilns at Jingdezhen. In 1726, in the third year of Yongcheng, Tang Ying became the supervisor of the kilns, a post he maintained for over a quarter of a century until he retired in 1756. Tang Ying was one of the few officials who held this position over 2 different reigns, a testament to his skill in supervising imperial porcelain manufacture and to his artistic sensibilities. The Qianlong Emperor began ordering snuff bottles made at the imperial porcelain factory at Jingdezhen during the 1740s, and such orders continued throughout his reign and that of his 2 successors. The early period of Qianlong dated snuff bottles is identifiable as the bottles were produced under the direction of Tang Ying. In 1743, the 8th year of Qianlong, an imperial order is recorded, which is specific to make 40 porcelain bottles of various forms. On the 21st day of the 11th month of 1743, the archives of the Imperial Household Workshop state, Tang Ying received a letter from Haiwang with an edict saying, ask Tang Ying to use the design, color, and glaze of this sedan chair vase as a prototype to fire some snuff bottles of varied shapes and colors. Remember to make them neither too large or too small. It is not necessary to fire the snuff bottle stoppers. The response to this edict provides a fascinating insight into the production of imperial porcelain bottles. The archival records state, Tang Ying, in a memorial to the emperor, stated his response and follow-up actions. As it was winter, the clay and raw materials were all frozen. According to the annual tradition, the artisans were on winter vacation. All of them went home, and hence the firing activities at the kilns were stopped. Upon receiving the edict, Tang Ying immediately summoned skillful potters from Jingdezhen to his customs officers at Zhujiang. Under his supervision, several different types of biscuits were produced, together with matching designs, colors, and patterns. They were instantly sent to Jingdezhen during the Chinese New Year and fired in the non-official kilns with rushes and coarse firewood. After the firing, overglazed enamels were hastily applied overnight. A total of 40 snuff bottles of different designs were fired and sent to the capital by family servants. Tang Ying further remarked that as the pieces were produced hastily, he, fearing the quality, glaze, and shape might not be up to the expectation of the emperor, did not charge the production expenses to government money, but he paid for them out of his own pocket. He indicated in the memorial that he was waiting for comments from the emperor, so he could follow them and make a larger production in the coming spring when the potters came back from vacation. He could then charge the sum to the special boat designated by the emperor from the income of the customs office. Following edicts indicate that the emperor was indeed satisfied and ordered that 50 snuff bottles be made every year from then on of the same design. Tang Ying died in 1756, shortly after a formal request to retire due to ill health, which may have been connected to the polluted atmosphere of Jingdezhen with its many working kilns. Qianlong period bottles were made in a variety of forms, which evolved as production increased, but the essential style that Tang Ying had put into place remained, with the majority of bottles being produced with central panels surrounded by decorated borders with a solid background color. Often the decoration within the panels on each main side would complement each other in terms of subject matter. For example, one panel might have a floral design, while the reverse would have a poem, sometimes penned by the Qianlong emperor, as is the case here, that related to the flowers depicted. Other designs were inspired by cloisonné enamels, with even the gilded wires of that medium imitated in the porcelain equivalents. The base marks of these bottles are similar, being well written and in the form of 4-character seals painted in iron red enamel with a transparent glazed base. The mouth and foot rims are in all cases gilded. Gilding of the foot and mouth of imperial porcelain bottles seems to be a general feature of bottles made in the Qianlong period. This is a porcelain bottle decorated using black, family rose, and iron red enamels with gilding. One main side with a garden of blossoming flowers, including a corn poppy. The reverse with a 28-character poem reading, "Such pain in this song for consort Yu. While pacing back and forth, I recall the riverbank of Chu. Who knows the tender heart? Only he who cherishes jade and fragrance. Is this not Mr. Xiang of ages past?" And there are 2 red seals, Qian and Long. The base has an iron red 4-character Qianlong Nyanja mark in seal script and is of the period. This poem refers both to the consort Yu, who was the favorite concubine of Xiang Yu, the king of Western Chu, who reigned circa 232 to 202 BC, and also to the corn poppy depicted on the pictorial side, which is emblematic of her beauty and which is given her name. This is an extremely rare example, utilizing more than one material, where the porcelain panels are in effect encased in a cinnabar lacquer on wood surround. This shape in porcelain, which, with its accompanying enameled floral scenes, occurs with both bottles from the Qianlong and Jiajing reign. With the translation of the imperial archives of the household department came fascinating information relating to this. In 1798, the 3rd year of the Jiajing reign, on the 7th day of the 10th month, the records state 22 pieces of 5-color porcelain bowls with lotus design were sent to the court from the Zhuijiang Customs Office. Among them, 11 pieces have Qianlong marks, and the other 11 have Jiajing marks. The imperial order said, select 8 pieces from the lot and send them to the imperial household workshops to make matching stands. The rest of the pieces should be kept together with these lots from the routine annual orders for porcelain. Respect this. Subsequently, 8 pieces were selected, 4 of which bore Qianlong marks, and the other 4 had Jiajing marks. This bottle also has a poem referring to the musk mallow flower on the pictorial side, taken from an album by Jiang Tingxi and penned by the Qianlong emperor. The poem reads, "The flower head is shining with gold. Facing the wind, it starts to dance. The flower is like the jade pendant of the heavenly immortals, dwelling in the heavenly pavilion, and like the maiden's crown from the celestial mountain. Bearing the dew gives greenness to 1,000 leaves. Facing the sun keeps its small heart red. Despite that, the yellow golden flower carries a deep memory, rendered as it is in its natural state." And it is followed by imperial composition and with 2 red seals, Qian and Long. This is a porcelain bottle decorated in the famille verte palette, with on one side a cricket perched on an open wicker cricket cage, its lid to one side, the reverse with a similar cricket, and its base has an iron red 4-character Daguan Nyanja mark in seal script and of the period. This is also imperial and attributed to the palace workshops at Qingdezhen. The design of a grasshopper was one of the most popular on porcelain snuff bottles of the Daguan period and later. The puns involved in the words for cattiids, crickets, and grasshoppers fall into 2 camps. The classic meaning would be to convey the wish for many sons. For example, may your children be as numerous as grasshoppers. A second meaning relates to the expression to be loyal to one's country. This was particularly apt during the Daguan period, as corruption abounded within the court, whilst political unrest was sweeping the country. The cricket, specifically, was known for its fighting skills and was popular at every level of society. The strongest fighting crickets were traded for large amounts of money and were known for their courage and stamina. During the Daguan period, a style became popular which combined famille rose and iron red enamels with underglazed blue designs, sometimes with gilding. The design evolved from the floral designs with accompanying poems on imperial porcelain snuff bottles from the Qianlong and Jiaqing periods, as we have seen in the last few slides. Although they seem to have fallen out of fashion by the Daguan period, when other styles of decoration became popular. It was not just the change in design that evolved, but also the change in form, ranging from a flattened rectangular shape to a flattened globular form. At the same time, the fashion for molded porcelain bottles rapidly developed, reaching its height in the Daguan period, along with less use of overglazed enamels and the acceptance of underglazed colors, including underglazed blue and red. Interest in glass in China was such that in the 35th year of the reign of Kangxi, the Imperial Glass House was founded in 1696. From that time and throughout the Qing dynasty, glassworks turned out a great number of objects, including snuff bottles. Craftsmen were sent first from Guangzhou and later from Boshan to the Imperial Palace workshops in Beijing. In 1728, the documents of production of Yangqing Hall Palace workshops of the Imperial Household Department of the Qing dynasty mentions the appearance at the court of snuff bottles of Guangzhou glass, although we are not presently able to identify those. The Imperial Glass House was built within the confines of the Forbidden City. During the reign of Yongcheng, it was moved to the Summer Palace, the Yuanming Yuan, where it remained until the end of the Qing dynasty. Whilst working at the palace, the craftsmen were aided by Westerners, and specifically the Jesuit missionaries who were seconded to the court. It was a German missionary, Kilian Stumpf, who was ordered by the Kangxi Emperor to construct the first imperial glass house. However, the Jesuits' main contribution here appears to be in the building of larger furnaces to produce bigger items such as window panes for the Yuanming Yuan. Nevertheless, there is clearly Western influence evident in this 18th century example of aventurine or gold star glass, with its scalloped panels and attached lid covering the stopper. From the early days of the Imperial Glass House, there was an interest in aventurine or gold star glass. This is glass interspersed with gold flecking. This developed in the Qianlong period, with snuff bottles made of reddish-brown glass, which is interspersed with gold flecks and sandwiched between two layers of transparent glass. What at first appears as a fairly simple, plain piece of glass is in reality a very sophisticated example of established manufacture. The exchange of gifts at the imperial court between courtiers, officials, princes, and visiting dignitaries was institutionalized on a massive scale during the Qianlong period, with snuff bottles accepted as a fitting tribute to those in power, both domestically and abroad. Additionally, the Qianlong Emperor regularly ordered the making of snuff bottles to give as gifts at 3 festivals each year: the Dragon Boat Festival, the Lunar Festival, and the Spring Festival. In 1755, Qianlong ordered 500 snuff bottles to be made for distribution as gifts while staying at his palace in Chengde. This was in addition to all of the other orders made in the same year. This gives you an idea of the number of bottles produced. The bottle shown here is an imperial 18th century glass bottle of rounded form, the opaque green glass suffused with aventurine splashes. Although we cannot know exactly which style of glass bottles was made for bestowal, this bottle has all the hallmarks of palace production. The green color, in combination with aventurine glass, appears from the Qianlong period onwards, although the Yongcheng reign inherited about 30 colors from the previous reign. Opaque green and aventurine or gold star glass are both colors listed in the archives related to the items ordered by the Zhao Banchu. It appears that opaque colors such as this one are a product of the Qianlong period, while gold star glass appeared before then. In 1705, in the 44th year of his reign during his southern tour, the Kangxi Emperor made a bestowal gift of 17 glass pieces to a senior official in Suzhou. Gold star or aventurine glass was very popular in the Qianlong period, not only because of its connection to a stone considered precious by the Manchus, but also because they liked European glass of the same period. In 1753, the archives listed a snuff bottle to be made in green gold star. This shows that the glass workshops were already using aventurine glass as a monochrome color and in combination with other colors. This bottle and an imperial yellow glass example in the Crane collection are clearly connected in their parallel designs, although the Crane example has a scalloped form foot rim. The opaque yellow tone of the Crane bottle is connected by its specific color to the palace workshops of the 18th century. It is difficult to see any other further meaning in the design, other than the highly contemporary looking ribbed wave pattern, illustrating the technical virtuosity of the glassmaker. However, there is also a ruby red glass bottle in the Crane collection, which also uses this design very effectively in the lower half of the bottle to show a somewhat stylized wave pattern, one side with the moon and the other side with the sun above, leaving the viewer in no doubt that the ribbed pattern on that bottle depicts water. The same meaning cannot be easily extended to this ribbed glass bottle. Nevertheless, it remains today a highly appealing and innovative work of art of the highest quality. The colors of glass made in imitation of realga are richly varied, reflecting not only the attraction of the original material that the glass copied, but also the inherent magical qualities that made the stone a favorite of the Taoists. Realga glass survives in tones of vivid dapple red to an almost monotone orange, such as the example shown here. Despite the seemingly large amount of realga glass bottles extant today, very few multifaceted examples are published. This bottle, with its wheel-cut Qianlong Nianja mark, represents the height of glassmaking in the palace in the early 18th century, at a point where the integrity of form and material were combined to produce a deceptively simple but stellar work of art. It was not only glass snuff bottles that were made in imitation of realga, but also vases, dishes, and other scholars' works of art. There is an example published in the book entitled A Chorus of Colors, which is a fluted glass vase with a similar Qianlong Nianja base mark, helping to date the whole group of works of art, including snuff bottles, to that period. The intention of using faceting in Europe would have been to showcase the brilliance of a cut gemstone, such as ruby, while this form in the imperial palace would have simply been seen as a novelty and an innovative shape at the court. While transparent glass bottles enhance the radiance of the material, an opaque bottle would not demonstrate the same effect. It is important to remember that continually throughout the 18th century, there was a cross-fertilization of ideas due to the movement of workers to Beijing from Boshan and Guangzhou. Whilst these workers brought with them the techniques and knowledge acquired outside the palace, at the imperial workshops Yangqing Hall, they were artistically subjected to the restrictions imposed by the court. This manifests itself predominantly in the choice of subject matter and shape, with the palace workshops producing wares including snuff bottles, with the classical archaistic design seen on bronzes and ceramics. This 18th century blue overlay on milk white glass bottle, with its design of a 5-petaled curling mallow flower and scrolling borders, is reminiscent of patterns seen on blue and white porcelain of earlier periods. During the early years of Qing dynasty glass production, in the reigns of Kangxi and Yongcheng, new colors were quickly added to the repertoire of the glassmakers. Clear glass, white, translucent blue, yellow, and a highly appreciated red, which contained colloidal gold, were the order of the day. During the Qianlong period, the output became prolific, with a myriad of additional colors being added to the 18th century palette, though ruby red remained very popular. Techniques became increasingly sophisticated, though they followed the tradition of previous reigns. Aligned with this advanced stage of the development of monochromes were the fine overlay glass pieces of both single and multiple casing. This is a clear bubbly glass bottle of bulbous teardrop form, carved on one main side with a crane with a rod in its beak, flying towards a fortressed pavilion beside towering pine trees and among scrolling clouds, the reverse with the heavenly pavilion floating on a bank of clouds above frothy waves and rockwork. The subject matter of early overlay glass bottles focused on themes which retained a formal appeal, such as dragons rising from the waves or flying through the sky in search of the flaming pearl. Symbolic of the emperor as the divine ruler, dragons depicted on snuff bottles were in high demand at the court. A further indicator of early Qing dynasty glass is a phenomenon known as crizzling, which is seen in the ground of the bottle rather than in the overlay. It was originally thought that this was merely a bad recipe in the glass, with the alkaline content being disproportionate to the mix. However, it is now known that crizzling was caused by the introduction of foreign crushed Western glass into the mix. This was unwittingly done by the craftsmen sent from Guangzhou, in the belief that they were creating stronger glass with greater clarity. Over time, of course, the opposite has proved true, as crizzling has taken hold over these pieces. Foreign glass was combined with Chinese glass for about 3 decades during the first half of the 18th century, and is appealing to collectors as it reveals the age of the bottles. The subject matter of early overlay glass bottles focuses on themes which, in the palace workshops, the breadth of overlay colors increased dramatically to include blue, green, purple, and black, as well as the more common ruby red.
Hold on.
Not content.
Can you just start in the beginning of the slide again?
Yeah, sorry. In the palace workshops, the breadth of overlay colors increased dramatically to include blue, green, yellow, purple, black, and the more common ruby red. Not content with overlaying glass onto a plain white or snowflake ground, the variation in background color also increased. The Imperial Collection houses examples of white overlay on a blue ground carved with gentian flowers. Here are 2 examples of the same subject, both very elegant, with the bottle on the right being a slightly more sophisticated example of the subject. It is still not clear when Beijing's commercial glass production began. Given that Beijing was the capital of the last 3 dynasties and that glass production was a centralized process, it was likely that it commenced relatively early. Glass crafted in Beijing was termed liaoqi, meaning objects fashioned from glass made in Shandong. This was the name given by the glassmakers of Boshan to glass which was subsequently used in Beijing. There was no initial manufacturing process of glass from raw materials in Beijing. It was transported into the area as ingots or blocks, which were then reheated and blown to make the finished product. During the reign of Qianlong, when snuff taking was fashionable both at court and with the wealthy, there was keen competition between 3 studios for the production of snuff bottles: the Xin family, the Le family, and the Yuan family. Attributions of individual bottles to these families is a tenuous though appealing notion. As such, the stories of their work have been embellished over the years. Quotes translated from a text of the 1860s state, "The Xin family overlays are the most cleanly done, and as their colors are made out of crushed gems, the luster dazzles the eye." Of the Yuan family overlays, the text noticed they are similar to the Xin family examples. A reference to the Le family states, "Those have a lotus powder ground, as white as frozen snow." The way that the colors are arranged is also quite extraordinary, with red, purple, sky blue, and kingfisher blue alternating with one another in a natural fashion. However, it is not clear whether lotus powder ground refers to an opaque milk white ground or a snowflake ground. All that can be assumed is that 3 families were making fine overlay snuff bottles in the Qianlong period, who were famous by the 1860s. This is a fascinating glass bottle from the second half of the 18th century, overlaid in red on a snowflake ground, carved on one main side with rockwork from which branches of bamboo grow, the reverse not shown with a scene of blossoming prunus branch growing from rockwork beside lingja, all in the shade of a pine tree, the two sides with narrow sides with rockwork. If you look carefully, it is clear that the bamboo shown is growing in a design resembling calligraphy, which reads, "Fragrance is left in the pavilion." During the 18th century, cities such as Yangzhou were extraordinarily wealthy. In the 19th century, the wealth was concentrated in nearby Suzhou, connected to Yangzhou along the Grand Canal. The wealthy bourgeois merchants located in this area were culturally nouveau, demanding that the local artisans provide them with a chance to emulate the literati and aristocratic figures to whom they aspired. Thus, art increasingly became a commercial activity. This is evident in several areas such as painting, porcelain, and glassware. A group of glass snuff bottles survives, along with very few objects which we can attribute to the commercial workshops of the 19th century. It is entirely likely that at this time, both good and bad were being produced simultaneously in large numbers by craftsmen at varying levels of competence. By the last quarter of the 18th century and until the middle of the 19th century, glassmaking was prevalent not just in the imperial workshops, but throughout the country in areas such as Boshan, Suzhou, and Yangzhou. It was revived again in the second half of the 19th century in Yangzhou. The largest group of Yangzhou school overlay bottles can be identified by its thin layer of single or multicolored glass carved over a milk-white ground. Approximately 1/3 of these bottles have an inscription, seal, or the name of a pavilion carved on the bottle. The quality of this whole group is tremendously variable, from the poorest carving to the most elevated standard of decoration. In recent years, dating of the whole group of Yangzhou school bottles has been re-evaluated by Hugh Moss and Stuart Sargent, based in part on the discovery that the name of the person carved on these bottles, Li Junting, was not a maker of bottles as was originally thought, but a collector of bottles who lived in the second half of the 19th century in the Yangzhou area. Li Junting was a collector from Xinjiang, whose other given names was Weisha. This is known from snuff bottles carved with various combinations of names and dates, such as Mr. Li of Xinjiang with the seal Junting or Weisha, or simply Li. Xinjiang is the old name for Zhenjiang, 8 miles across the river from Yangzhou. Both glass and enamel wares produced in southern China tend to depict naturalistic subject matters, evidence of the environment in which the pieces were made. Stylistically, Yangzhou school glass overlays are worlds away from the glass overlays of Beijing. The triple overlay carved bottles, such as the superb example shown here with fishermen on the river in sampans, are much less formalized than the classic subject matter of Beijing glass. It is clear that even though they were made in the second half of the 19th century, the level of quality and sophistication of design is still there, albeit in a location far removed from the excesses of the late Qing court. Before we leave the area of glass snuff bottles, I want to show the innovation that came out of the glass workshops of Beijing. This is a beautiful example of a clear blue glass bottle, which has been embellished using incised pieces of mother of pearl to show birds and flowering plants in vessels, with a design much like the earlier example I showed of a rectangular Dosai porcelain bottle from the Daguan period. During the Kangxi and Yongzheng periods, only one jade workshop existed within the palace confines. It employed 25 workers, of whom 7 were craftsmen, 1 an inlayer, and 17 carvers. These workers mostly repaired and restored jade pieces from earlier dynasties, since there was a dearth of fresh material available until the Qianlong Emperor conquered the area around Khotan in 1759. After Qianlong gained control of the territory, 2 tons of Khotan jade were mined twice a year and sent to the palace to be fashioned into carvings, which included snuff bottles. The supply lasted through the remainder of the Qianlong period and into the subsequent Jiaqing period until 1821, when the era came to an end. The imperial workshops were established by the 18th century, with jade workshops not only within the palace, but also around the country. The Qianlong emperor, to satisfy his passion for jade, ordered 8 jade workshops to supplement the one at the palace. Apart from Tianjin, the other 7 locations were all in Jiangsu province: Fenyang, Hangzhou, Huai'an, Jiangning, Zhejiang, Suzhou, and Yangzhou. Jade snuff bottles produced in the imperial workshops, and specifically within the imperial palace, have certain recognizable characteristics, exemplified by the next 2 bottles shown. The small size of the bottles is worth noting, as many examples with a palace attribution are distinctly smaller than bottles produced outside the palace confines. This holds true not only for jade examples, but also for enamel on metal and glass bottles produced in the Beijing Palace workshops. Another feature of imperial jade bottles is a straightened neck as it approaches the mouth of the bottle, almost like an integral collar. One often finds such a neck in combination with a wide mouth. This is considered an appealing feature of glass bottles, as it demonstrates control of the glass blowing process. But with jade bottles, it allows the carver to more easily hollow out the vessel. The paper-thin hollowing of jade bottles from the palace workshops does not, however, seem to be an essential requirement. While the bottles are usually reasonably hollowed, they frequently have a solid area in the bottom 1/5 of the bottle, presumably to weight the bottle, to give it balance and stability. Additionally, it is recorded that dried flowers were sometimes placed in the mouth of bottles overnight to freshen and give fragrance to the snuff in the bottle. With a bottle that had a wide mouth, this would have been an easier task. This is an 18th century white jade bottle in the form of an eggplant with an attached spinach green calyx. Although it was previously thought that these bottles were made in sets of 10 or 20, since they still exist in the Palace Museum in boxes of those numbers of bottles, it is apparent from the translations of the Imperial Archives that these boxes, themselves of high quality, were essentially packaging for the bottles to be sent up to the palace. The Qianlong emperor had a great fondness for jade, and in particular for the archaic jade of preceding dynasties. In the second half of his reign, when the supply of jade was more plentiful, he ordered that a large number of pieces be made. These were manufactured by order in the 8 workshops around the country. This bottle is an 18th century imperial white jade bottle carved with a basket weave design. This design is a popular one on snuff bottles from this period and was produced originally in the palace workshops in jade, crystal, agate, and glass. Its inspiration comes from woven baskets used as functional containers for a variety of purposes throughout history. A woven exterior cover for containers with rigid or more brittle surfaces, such as pottery, was also used presumably for insulation and protection, especially when traveling. The pattern is sometimes described as a stylized rice grain pattern. Given that after 1760 the palace had an increased supply of jade, it is likely that at this time, carvers of Suzhou would also have had access to a proportional increase in the commercial jade supply. This expansion accelerated the production of wares for the palace, both in the imperial workshops and in Suzhou itself. The Zhao Banchu, the administrative office that controlled the palace workshops, provided a system that dictated preordained designs and orders for the pieces. The output in this sense is anonymous, as snuff bottles generally have no maker's mark on them, or occasionally the reign mark of the ruling emperor, or a collector's mark. Like this example, most of them are very well hollowed through an unusually narrow mouth, showing the skill and dexterity of the maker. Bottles such as this in white nephrite were of the highest quality and purity, suggesting a date after 1760, when the Qing dynasty extended its boundaries to include the jade-producing regions in Xiaojing province. From then on, vast quantities of the purest stone were provided annually as a tribute to the emperor, lasting until the Daguan period. The Qianlong emperor had a great fondness for jade. Consequently, in the second half of his reign, when the supply was more plentiful, he ordered a large number of pieces to be produced, including snuff bottles. The best jade snuff bottles have an almost magical quality. Shown here is an imperial 18th century yellow jade bottle of rectangular form, left uncarved to show the intense color of the stone. Sir Percival David in London translated the Kaogu Yao Lun, The Essentials of Chinese Connoisseurship, written during the Ming Dynasty, where the comments about jade are pertinent. White jade, the most valuable stones are of mutton fat color. Those with color of ice or of rice porridge, or the color of fat or of snowflakes, are next in quality. Yellow jade, stones with the color of the chestnut kernel, known also as sweet yellow, are the most valuable. Jade that is truly yellow in color is very rare. To hollow out a bottle until it is translucent as this one would usually leave the stone with an uneven color. Yet the strength of this yellow color is evident despite the thinness of its walls. There is no reason to adorn this bottle in any way. The carver is aware that he has created a masterpiece by using a superb piece of stone and hollowing it out until it cannot be hollowed further. Its simple form is deceptive. It is so correctly proportioned that even removing the foot rim would have destroyed the subtle balance of purity and form. Double gourds symbolize longevity, and because of the large number of seeds in them, the wish for many sons. Double gourds as a motif appear often on snuff bottles made from a variety of materials, including jade, porcelain, and glass, among others. Bottles were also produced in the shape of double gourds, with some made from gourds themselves. Additional meanings attributed to the double gourd include the upper bulb symbolizing heaven, or the heavenly place to which one aspires, and the lower bulb, the earthly realm in which one lives. The symbolic importance of the double gourd, including at the imperial court, cannot be underestimated. The archives of the Imperial Household Department show that in 1754, the box workshop was ordered to make a container to safely hold a double gourd-shaped glass flower holder in opaque green with blue overlay. The listing specified that the item would be held at the palace rather than given away as a gift, indicating the treasured status of the vase. Jadeite has been highly prized by the Chinese for centuries. It was known to them from the late Ming Dynasty, but did not become a treasured material until the last quarter of the Qianlong reign, when it became accepted at court as a highly valued alternative form of jade, being introduced from Burma where it was mined. Initially, the Chinese traders bought it directly across the Burmese borders, although after 1780, supplies became more dependable by a regular traffic through Guangzhou. While the purest emerald green jadeite was infrequently fashioned into snuff bottles, apple green jadeite was used more often. Such was the fascination for the stone that it rapidly became a material favored by the Qianlong emperor and his extensive family. It is likely that this example is from the end of the 18th century, as it mirrors the very well hollowed plain white nephrite examples that were produced at that time. There are very few jadeite bottles in any collection which can be genuinely classified as emerald green, since the majority are of apple green tones. This stunning imperial jadeite bottle is one exception to that. The Qianlong emperor, fond of both white jade and archaic jade, also loved the brilliant greens in jadeite, and he paid dearly to obtain it. The Chinese have traditionally taken a poetic approach to appreciating art, including towards the materials with which they work. The name given to jadeite is feisui. This compares the stone to the brilliance of kingfisher's plumage. Jadeite itself, however, does not appear in exactly the colors of the feathers, or indeed with their iridescence. Like the yellow jade bottle previously mentioned, there is no need to add any detailed carving to this elegant, well-hollowed bottle, other than the rectangular raised panels on each side. Although jadeite is a material that is harder than nephrite, it is also more brittle and consequently is not so easily carved or hollowed out. The bottle shown here is almost certainly an 18th century example made from a piece of jadeite that would only have been available to the craftsmen in the imperial workshops. At that time, jadeite of this color would have been considered highly valuable and be treasured in any collection. Let us turn briefly to inside painted bottles. Zhou Luoyuan, Ding Ezhong, Ye Chun-san, and Marcia Schwann, who painted from 1867 to 1939, are the four masters of inside painted bottles. The subject of butterflies is particularly one of Marcia Schwann's recognized themes, which also influenced other renowned artists such as Gui Shanggu, who painted from 1895 to 1900. In 1896, there are 6 recorded butterfly bottles painted by Marcia Schwann, dedicated to the subject of boundless joy. This is a crystal bottle of rectangular form, with on one main side a scene of different variety of butterflies flitting among plants and flowers, the reverse with the theme of the 8 brokens or bapo, comprising of 5 calligraphic ink rubbings and fan paintings. One painting depicting fan-tailed carp swimming, another with bird and flower painting. The bottle is signed Marcia Schwann with one red seal. The ink rubbings read as follows. On the mid-right, clever and trustworthy at a young age, the mind is nurtured to understand the 3 voids. On the lower left, the Palace of 9 Accomplishments was built on the site of the Palace of Benevolence and Longevity of the Sui dynasty. And on the lower right, water flows outside the door, but where is the horizon? And whose house is it that is surrounded by trees? And that is signed Han Zu Yin with one red seal. The fashion of smoking cigarettes in the 20th century brought with it less demand for snuff, and by extension, the use of snuff bottles. One group of bottles where the art was not lost was that of inside painted bottles. The first artists painted bottles in the Daguan period, and this continued throughout the 19th century, with the artists of the early 20th century becoming highly skilled and prolific in their output. One master of this art who is alive today is Wang Shizan, born in 1938, who was taught by the sons of Ye Chun-san. Wang, whose former name was Wang Rucheng, began painting in 1957 under the pupillage of the Ye brothers, Ye Xiaofang and Ye Bengji. He quickly surpassed them through his ability and artistic talent, and by 1962, at his studio Peaceful Hamlet, began to paint some of his finest work. Wang was banished in August 1966 from Beijing to Hebei province, where his family had come from, and he was forced to work as a peasant farmer by the commune there. He took with him 3 blank bottles hidden in his bedding, which he painted and used to persuade the commune's management that he could make more money for them by selling these than by farming. They allowed him to travel to Tianjin, where he posed as an agent for the painter, and quickly sold the 3 inside painted bottles. Gradually, he was allowed to give up farming and continued to paint for the commune. A trip to appeal his exile in 1967 failed, and he remained in Hebei province. Despite the trials of the Cultural Revolution and its attendant hardships, Wang's art was highly creative and technically skillful at this time. In 1969, he began using the studio name Yihu Zai, One Bottle Studio. Wang often used older bottles in different materials, such as crystal, agate, and amber, to evoke a mood or to make the bottle part of the painting. Wang did not often paint portraits unless commissioned to do so. This example not only shows his ability to do that with great success, but also demonstrates his technical virtuosity in the execution of his calligraphy in different scripts on the reverse of the bottle. There are a prolific number of bottles carved using the node of the bamboo, but they're often rather thin and unappetizing looking, understandable given the nature of the material. This exceptionally well-carved example, unusually in the form of a pea pod with ripe peas and a small insect on the exterior of the pod, is one of the few more generous examples where the bulbous shape and the richly textured patination of the surface help create a perfectly ripe pea pod form bottle that would appeal to the literati or those who aspired to the scholarly life. Qidiao is a type of carved lacquerware that was developed in China in the 12th century. The technique of carving into layered coatings of lacquer is very time consuming, and as such, lacquerware was considered to be a luxury item. It was mostly used to fashion small objects such as dishes, boxes, and snuff bottles in the Qing dynasty, generally with layers of lacquer on a wood base, although there are examples of larger chargers and cabinets, and more rarely, pieces of furniture such as tables. The production process is called diaoqi, or carving lacquer. Before the early Ming period, lacquer carving followed the abstract guri, or sword pommel pattern, but subsequently the relief-carved red lacquer, known as cinnabar lacquer, became more popular with vessels and containers being carved with figures in a mountainous landscape, imperial dragons, and birds and flowers. In the early Ming period, the imperial workshop was known as the Orchard Workshop. It was founded around 1416 in Lingjing Hutong near the Forbidden City. Workers from the south were sent there from Zhejiang province and also from Yunnan and Sichuan. Approximately 5,000 workers from the south were employed to work in the imperial workshops for up to 4 years at a time. Raw lacquer was also imported from the south, as the Chinese lacquer tree did not grow as far north as Beijing. After 20 years, the Orchard Workshop was closed in 1436, when the production of lacquerwares diminished. At the end of the 17th century, the imperial workshops founded by the Kangxi Emperor in 1680, of which one was a lacquer workshop. This continued throughout the 18th century, as the Qianlong Emperor was extremely fond of carved lacquer. After his death in 1799, imperial production of carved lacquer experienced a steep decline in terms of both quality and quantity of pieces. The majority of 18th century snuff bottles seem to follow a similar style and subject matter, generally of figures in a mountainous landscape, carved in high relief on a shield-shaped wood body. This example is exceptional in its design of scrolling peonies, although the borders at the neck and foot follow a similar pattern to the landscape bottles. The gourd was a natural material, highly valued by the literati, as it is one of the most humble of materials. Even in its simplest form, it is highly charged with Taoist symbolism relating to paradise and the fairylands. As the double gourd has an upper and lower part divided by a narrow waist, so too was paradise separated from the mortal world by a narrow entrance designed to exclude the unenlightened. The double gourd form is a popular shape in the decorative arts of China. It is a motif that represents fertility and good fortune. Moreover, a vessel in the shape of double gourd, such as the richly patinated example shown here, is considered highly auspicious because it can absorb all the evil vapors of the universe, thus protecting those around it. There is a double gourd-shaped white jade bottle that bears a Qianlong Nyanja mark on the base in the National Palace Museum in Taipei, thus supporting a possible imperial attribution for this superb bottle. Wang Xixiang, the acknowledged world expert on gourds, in his Shuo Hu Lu, quotes from the writings of the Qianlong Emperor as follows. The gourd vessel was made during the reign of Kangxi. My royal grandfather ordered courtiers to mold the gourd growing on the trellis. Gourd vessels made by molding were invented in the reign of Kangxi. enclosure courtiers planted and passed on their craft. A gourd bottle such as the magnificent example shown here would have been made by tying string or rope around the young fruit so that it is forced to grow into a specific shape dictated by the constraints around it. The success of achieving symmetry is dependent on a variety of things, including the ability of the maker, which can be controlled, and other factors such as the force of nature, which cannot. This is one of the most beautiful and intriguing of enameled glass snuff bottles. It is enameled on one side with two deer grazing under prunus, with the reverse showing a phoenix among peonies with a butterfly above. The enameled glass is encased in a gilded metal surround, and the base is cast with a Qianlong Nyanja mark and is of the period. Its sheer quality alone raises it above other enameled glass bottles. The subject matter of deer under prunus, while highly symbolic and not unusual elsewhere, is rare on enameled bottles emanating from the court, where more formal designs were normal. The archives of the Imperial Household Department state that on the 29th day of the 9th month in 1740, the 6th year of Qianlong, snuff bottles made of enamel on copper, glass, jade, amber, and gold flecked glass, totaling 63 items bearing Qianlong marks, were put in miniature drawers within a lacquer box for safekeeping. This alone shows the esteem these delicate objects were held in the 18th century court, and that they were to be kept rather than given away as tributes. The enamel workshop within the palace was set up along with other workshops by the Kangxi Emperor. Enamel was known as fa lang and could be decorated on bottles of gold, copper, or glass. It was the Huafang, the painting workshop, of the Fa Lang Zuo, the enamel workshop, which was responsible for decorating the bottles which were then taken to be fired. An enamel on glass bottle would have been fired in the Boli Chang, the glass factory, with the stopper and spoon both being made in other workshops. Technically, the decoration of enamel on glass and enamel on metal is different. The enamels used on glass are similar to Famille Rose enamels on porcelain and are decorated using the heaping method. This is popularly known as Dui Liao Quan. This method differentiates enameled glass bottles made by the court from those later examples which are commercially made, where the enamel is thinner with little depth and is colored within each area in a single monotone. This is a white glass bottle enameled with a pair of quails under millet and flowers. There are many enamel on glass bottles that have merit, other than those produced in the palace workshops. At some point in the Daguan reign, Guye Xuan marked copies of imperial produced enamel bottles began to be made outside of the Yuanming Yuan, some of them of very high quality. This seems logical, given that the death of the Qianlong Emperor in 1799 would imply that there was no reason to make anything further for the Guye Xuan, which was his retirement home. Where were the other centers of enameling outside the palace workshops, and where did they operate? Other known centers of enameling, including Yangzhou, Guangzhou, and Yunnan, in addition to the private workshops in Beijing. The Yangzhou Gazette mentions an enamel artist named Wang Xixing, who worked from sometime in the Yongcheng period into Qianlong's reign, that is to say in the mid-18th century. The Gazette quotes as follows: "He had many friends, and his fame spread throughout the land. In the capital, his fine craftsmanship was praised, this artist being known in Peking as the enamelware king." This quote reveals much. Wang had many friends or clients, showing that even in the first half of the 18th century, he must have already been operating a lucrative commercial enterprise. This in turn suggests that enameled objects, including snuff bottles, were already popular outside the court. Wang's clients in Beijing would have already been exposed to his work, which must have been available for purchase in the city, as he was known there as the enamelware king. This implies that in Beijing, if a wealthy collector wanted a high-quality enamel piece, it could be commissioned from him based in Yangzhou. The bottles produced outside the palace have distinct characteristics. They are delicately designed with naturalistic subject matter, although some features such as the neck borders and the side designs are reminiscent of palace work. These bottles are often separated into two seams, sometimes by mask handles, in a similar matter to glass overlay bottles. The enamels are thinner and not heaped, as would be expected from a commercial workshop where cost was a factor. The base marks on these bottles are either a Verguye Xuan mark in seal script, as opposed to regular script on a palace enamel, or they would have had a Chenrong Nyanja mark in seal script, generally written in a straight line instead of within a square. At first glance, the Meiping form enamel on white glass bottle shown here, with its classic bird and flower design, may easily be mistaken for an 18th century bottle produced in the enameling workshops of the Forbidden City. Although part of the inside painting studio, known as the Apricot Grove Studio, the maker, Ye Bengji, is perhaps best known for his enameling skills. This enamel on white glass bottle shows Ye Bengji at his best. With its delicate shading and fine painting, this bottle is comparable to an 18th century imperial enamel on glass bottle. The reason for this, of course, lies in the proximity of Ye Bengji to the palace during his training. Ye Bengji was the third son of Ye Chunsan, one of the most prolific inside painted artists of the middle school. Although Ye Bengji learned the skill of inside painting, he was already fourth in line behind his father and his two older brothers. Ye Bengji was taught enameling by his father, Ye Chunsan, who in turn was apparently taught the art by his grandfather. Ye Bengji studied for at least 3 years, around 1920, before he began enameling bottles. He developed his art over the next years, reaching a peak in quality between 1933 and 1943, when his best works, such as the example illustrated here, were produced. After 1949, he did very little enameling, although he was responsible for teaching the art to his student, Wang Shizan, who became a master in his own right of both inside painted bottles and enameled bottles. The enamel bottles that Ye Bengji produced were made for commercial purposes and were sold to Beijing dealers, who in turn sold them as 18th century palace originals. Ye's finest works are of flowing bird and flower designs with intricately worked borders. Very occasionally, he also enameled landscapes, allegedly about 10, some with pudding stone marbled borders, again in imitation of 18th century palace style. Most agate bottles without an imperial designation are dated within the range of 1750 to 1860. The beginning date is given as a time when the popularity of snuff bottles began to climb and spread outside the court to both scholars and wealthy connoisseurs. The cutoff date is almost at the end of the Shanfeng period, when the country was in turmoil with the Taiping Rebellion, the near bankruptcy of the imperial court, and the resulting disintegration of art and crafts in areas such as Jingdezhen, where the kilns for ceramic production had been destroyed. Agate comes under the grouping of quartz and is specifically microcrystalline quartz, whose composition is silicon dioxide. It has a hardness of 7 and a specific gravity of 2.6 to 2.7. This makes it slightly harder than jade and softer than gemstones such as aquamarine, beryl, tourmaline, ruby, and sapphire. The last two are relevant because although there are not many snuff bottles in these materials, their composition is conundrum, which is used as part of the grinding compound of the lapidary in the carving and polishing of both jades and agates. This is a very well hollowed agate bottle, carved on one main side with a bird of prey perched on the twisted branch of a blossoming Huang Mei tree, an inscription to one side reading, "Yellow prunus is seen, heralding another spring." The reverse is left uncarved. As you can see, the bird's eye is highlighted through the carving, helping to emphasize the form of subject matter depicted. The term eyeball agate was a phrase coined in the 70s by Hugh Moss and is specific to snuff bottles. It refers to agate bottles with smaller concentric rings depicting the eye of the subject matter, usually birds, as in the case of this example, or sometimes fish, or on occasion horses or human figures. With this group, the design is very clear, although the silhouette has usually been achieved by a minimal amount of carving and polishing. The official school, of which this bottle is a part, is an accepted term for the group of agate bottles since its invention in the 1990s by Hugh Moss. In some cases, however, it is useful to label bottles according to their subject matter. This does not necessarily infer that all of these bottles were made at the same time in the same workshop. Additionally, some groups overlap, and it is possible, for example, to attribute a bottle both to the official school and to the Suzhou school. Within the Chinese bureaucratic system of the court, the snuff bottle was the perfect vehicle to be used socially and politically to curry favor, to gain an audience to those in power, and to show appreciation for favors received. Those who had gained rank and prestige were able to show their superiority by dispensing snuff bottles as gifts to those beneath them. Chinese art spoke to connoisseurs on many different levels of communication. A bottle such as this would have been perceived as the ideal gift for an aspiring official and would today be categorized as being part of the official school. Agate is a banded, multicolored variety of chalcedony. It occurs in a boundless amount of colors and patterns, and as such, no two agate bottles will ever be identical. As a stone, the extraordinary beauty and uniqueness of agate were responsible for its great popularity with collectors from the 18th century onwards. In the rock, it forms in rounded nodules, which must be sliced open to reveal the hidden internal patterns. The great carver can allow this to be enjoyed by those who can simply appreciate the stone itself without any further adornment, or it can be carved to great effect with subjects that are suggested by the inclusions in the stone itself. There is a wide range of agate bottles, but those that reach a stellar quality, especially in the case of silhouette agate bottles, are the most exciting of snuff bottles. It is often necessary to polish into the surface to enhance the scene, but with the best of these examples, only slight polishing is necessary to give a clear definition to the whole identifying picture. I am showing this superbly hollowed bottle as my final example, as with no polishing, there is still the most evocative scene, resembling an ink play painting, with the silhouette of a continuous mountainous landscape, with a sampan moored on the banks of a lake, floating amongst lotus, with the misty rain falling on what might be the Yangtze River. Others of you may see something else, such as a dragon flying through the clouds in pursuit of a flaming pearl. But that is the glory of these bottles, that they can be appreciated for different things by different people. In conclusion, it is a true privilege to be amongst such magnificent works of art. This exhibition and my lecture, hopefully, provides a cornucopia of delight for you and a rare chance to experience an abundance of snuff bottles of the highest quality and the widest variety. Thank you so much.